trademark that or anything. But my buddy's gonna love that. I've never heard that, but I've been doing this a long time. Got a lot of them. Sorry, sir.
It went well this time, thankfully.
I'd like to bring this town council meeting of March 15th to order. Please stand, pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag. Roll call, Twyla.
Certainly. Counselor Albert?
Here.
Counselor Colby?
Here.
Counselor Ward?
Here.
Counselor Bickford?
Here.
Counselor Crafts?
Here.
And Counselor Brunel?
Here.
And is Counselor McTevier
McTevier
excused?
has been excused. Next item, Twyla.
Is good news and recognition?
I got two. You guys are getting used to this, though. Lisbon's Unified Basketball Team won the regional playoffs tonight. They're going to be in the States, hopefully, well, it should be announced here soon, between Hamden and Messalonskee, Thursday night, 6 o'clock at the high school. We were hosting the event one way or the other, so it's going to shape up to be something cool to see. I'd also like to recognize the Lisbon Drama Team for competing Saturday, the States, for one-act play. That's up in Ellsworth? Millinocket. One or the other. One or the other. They're actually out on that. Laura Campbell is actually trying to put funds together to actually make arrangements for that. So if anybody has any spendable income that they'd like to defer her way, she would love to hear from you. That's it.
Anybody else? Next item, Twyla.
There are no public hearings. It would be audience participation or response for agenda items.
Anybody?
It's gonna be a quick one.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Next item, Twyla.
Is the consent agenda. Any counselor wishing to have an item removed may do so now. Seeing none. Order 2016-64 to approve the minutes of February 25 and March 1.
Any motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Order passed 6-0.
Next item, Twyla.
Under council orders, resolutions, and ordinances, Order 2016-65, transfer snowmobile reimbursement to Recreation Reserve Account.
We received our annual reimbursement from the state in the amount of $2,250, and we just need council's approval to transfer that to the account that's been set up under the Recreation Reserve to deposit these funds. We do this annually, and the account currently has a balance of $4,917.67. As I said, we do this annually, and it is the funds are used whenever the Snowmobile Club requests it to maintain their equipment and the trails when needed. And I don't think, we haven't had any withdrawals from it in the last couple of years, so it's building up, which is good. So all we need is authorization for the finance director to transfer the snowmobile reimbursement funds in the amount of $2,250 to the Recreation Reserve account.
Need a motion?
Sure.
Second?
I'll second.
Just
All
quick,
in favor?
can I, just a quick question?
Yep.
You said it was building up. Any, just a rough idea what's in that account?
We've got $4,917.67 before we transfer the amount.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
How many, what's the mileage on trails that they actually maintain?
The Snowmobile Club, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Okay.
Is there anything on that?
I don't know either. It's because it's, well,
Snow
there's
Chiefs,
two
right?
snowmobile clubs in town, so I don't really know.
Both using the same funds needs?
Most of the time, yeah.
One side of
club's
town.
bigger. The Snow Chiefs are a lot bigger.
Right,
Well,
that's the only one I heard of, but I didn't want to
there is one
presuppose
with-
either. Thank you, just looking for general awareness.
Yeah, understanding more than
This
anything
is,
else.
I will tell you, this was set up years ago by our forefathers when snowmobile started.
Right.
Oh, hey, it's great.
And, it's not unique to all towns, but, you know, Topsom doesn't do this, and when they've got a fairly big club and they do not do it. And it hurts.
Yep.
You know, we need to buy a piece of equipment, we have to come up with some awful creative financing to purchase
Sure.
it.
Sure, there's only so many funds to go around these days, many.
Lots of communities, what they do when they get the reimbursement back, they turn it over to the snowmobile club. It's
Right.
not anything the towns ever keep. It's usually turned over to a snowmobile club. Here, we keep it, and then if they need it, they come to us, and then we end up,
We release it.
It's better to
re-release
hold the
it,
purse
yeah.
strings.
Hmm?
It's better to hold the purse strings, so at least you get an idea of what's actually going on.
The last thing that they bought when I was here was, they bought like an S10 Blazer with tracks on it to do.
Right.
Grooming, yeah.
Okay.
I figured that might be what this is for ultimately. Those can get pretty pricey pretty
Yep.
quick, especially when one goes down.
Thank you, just get an idea of what we were doing.
We're all set, all we have to have is a vote.
The vote.
Yep. All in favor?
Order passed 6-0.
Next item, Twyla?
Order 2016-66 to redesignate funds for Beaver Park Trailer.
Absolutely not.
Mark, you want to, fill us in on this?
Since you already said no, might as well sit down. Just for, also, 15 years ago, we used the reserve funds to pave the ice rink at the high school. I think that was a few $1,000s, but it goes to certain, special projects as well in the past. Okay, this $533 that we're asking for is money that's left in the general ledger account, I believe, for ball fields. And this was back in the day where we were able to carry forward funds that weren't spent throughout the year. And we're trying to spend these GL accounts down anyway. And I've researched a few trailers that we're looking for. We've been looking for almost a year now for a good used trailer, and we haven't found anything that's worth paying that much money for that's going to work for us. So an extra $500 would give us enough funds to purchase a brand new one. So that's what this is for.
You said you have the money in another account?
Well, we had some money that
Plus the seed money.
that you approved last fall from I think it was a boiler account, and
Yeah, the
also,
furnace
and also the
replacement at the cabin plus the wreath fund.
the wreath fund. Yeah.
Yep.
So we'll have about $3,500 in all.
Are those ball fields, Beaver Park, which location? Or is it just general, never really
Yeah, it's actually for Pinewoods,
Pinewood?
Yep.
Pinewoods Fields.
I feel comfortable with making that recommendation.
I just want to understand it, and I'm comfortable with it too, but so the Pinewoods fields, how will they be made? I mean, this is not for maintenance of those fields. It is maintenance.
It was back in the day,
Yeah.
but now we have money budgeted for it.
Okay. Right.
So that it's still going to be maintained exceptionally. It's just that this money was left over into an account that we didn't spend out. I wasn't always good at spending the money at the end of the year, so we carried forward a lot of it for years and years.
Yeah, traditionally, that's what they did here, is they carried forward.
Right.
We're not doing that anymore.
Oh, that's
Only
great.
unless we have a specific purpose and we couldn't get the money spent in the current year.
I just wanted to get an understanding. I
Yeah.
figured there was a plan in place to maintain those fields, but I wanted to hear it,
Yeah.
just so I'd understand a little bit better. Now I know. That's
Yes.
great.
Yep.
Thank you, Mark.
And what's the trailer going to be used for?
It's going to be, actually, that's a good question, because we have been borrowing Public Works trailer for several years, and they need their trailer, and when they have it, we don't. And so basically, it's going to be purchasing our own trailer, so we don't have to borrow, and it's going to be used to haul 2 Exmark lawnmowers around, and it's going to be big enough to haul our Kubota tractor from Lisbon
Nice.
Falls to Lisbon, so.
I've got a motion and a second.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Order passed.
Next item,
6-0.
please, Twyla.
Order 2016-67, the election of 2016 Androscoggin Valley Council of Government officers. Would you like me to read the officers on the back?
I know one. I think very highly of Ed Barrett. That's all I can offer you. He happens to be my employer.
How many do we have to elect, all of them?
I think that was a point for a raise.
Well, if you know one, I don't,
In that regard, what I intended to do, if he was in the office today, was say, "Oh, okay, is there anything I should know about the other folks associated with that?" But
I don't know. I guess we'll just vote for Ed Barrett, 'cause I
Well,
don't know
typically, I
anybody else.
think what you do is vote for the whole slate of officers.
that would be the recommendation.
Okay. Need a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Need a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Order passed, 6-0.
Next item, Paula.
Under other business, town manager's report.
Just want to report that the tax collections have been coming in strong this week. The taxes were due today. Yesterday, we processed quite a big amount of mail and dealt with a lot of people at the counter. So we're right on track. I have had several delinquent personal property taxpayers come in and pay on their taxes. And yesterday, I went to Maine District Court and filed about 12 claims, which will be appearing on, I'm hoping, on the next docket for small claims. So we're working on that. And the insufficient funds checks that you noticed in the audit report, we're making a lot of headway on those since we brought them back in town. Pauline's really doing a good job. She's collecting a lot of the back ones that date back to 2013, and we're keeping the current ones current. So it's working by bringing it back in-house. So I wanted to report on that. She's really working hard on it, and it's paying off. That's it.
Next item, Paula.
Department head reports, the written reports for council review.
I went through them. I have no problem with them myself. Anybody?
I know I mentioned to Diane, and I think you in passing when I saw you at the planning board, where Ryan had a soft winter, anything that he could actually do to accelerate some plans to get it done before June 30th to save us in next year's
Yeah.
budget.
I had a talk with him about that, and he's going to be, when he presents his budget,
Right.
he's going to talk about that. I think he's got a plan for some of the money.
That would be great. That was it, sir. I'll just double check. I'm good.
Okay. You need a motion for that? Okay. Next item.
Is the department heads oral reports. Recreation Department, Mark Stevens.
In addition to all of our summer planning, we have a lot going on in the summertime. Makes up about 70% of our entire budget and most of our programs. In addition to all that, I wrote down a few things that we either have recently done, we're currently doing, or we're getting ready to do. And if you have any questions, because there's several bullet statements, just interrupt me and we'll stop and talk about it. To start, our first annual winter festival at Beaver Park was well attended and considered a success. Thankfully, we had a stretch of cold weather that dumped about 8 inches of snow just days before the festival. Our sponsors and attendees gave us a lot of positive feedback, and they're looking forward to next year. On the flip side of that, the unseasonably warm temperatures are giving us an early opportunity to begin the winter cleanup for both the trails and the parks. We've started selling Beaver Park tickets already, annual passes, and so far we have at least one wedding that's planned in the park this summer. Last year I think we had 2. First question is there alcohol available in the parks? And that's a no. But if you want to get married there, certainly a great place to get married. We have 2 possible scout projects that we're working with the scouts with right now. One is to build our first informational marquee that's going to be located halfway down the new trail on Androscoggin River Trail. And the second one would be a much bigger project, and it's going to be to build some bog bridges down on the Jessup Trail in Beaver Park. Our fishing derby is scheduled to be held on May 14th at Beaver Park. The ponds will be stocked with trout at least twice prior to this event. Last year, we had about 150 kids and parents attending. Currently, we have 103 students registered for our before and after school rec program. This is the most we've ever had in a 10-year span. It's a well-received program. It operates every day after school, Monday through Friday at MTM. Lynn Strout is bringing our seniors to Savannah, Georgia in April. It's a 10-day trip. We also are bringing them to Lancaster, Pennsylvania in May, and to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee in September. We're planning a trip to Fenway Park, whitewater rafting trip in June. Lynn is also getting prices on a possible trip to Alaska. We haven't got anything in writing yet. That's going to be in 2017. So it's been crazy. Our department is participating in the Androscoggin Chamber of Commerce Job Fair at Maine Community College, April 1st. This is an opportunity to give us a wider reach of possible candidates for both the Parks and Recreation departments. In addition, Sherry and I are attending the annual Maine Recreation Park Association Conference. This is going to be held in Portland. Some of the sessions, one of them is cutting-edge information on hiring and training summer employees. Other sessions will be available, for example, managing interns, youth sports philosophy, safety standards, and also there's going to be a session on Maine Freedom Access Act. Keynote speaker will be retired Army Staff Sergeant Travis Mills of the 82nd Airborne. And lastly, on Tuesday morning, I will be representing our department in an interview or two with WMTW Channel 8's weather team, as they're going to be at Sug Middle School all morning, learning about Lisbon while they teach our kids about weather. That's all I have. Any questions?
What's the trip to Alaska?
Well, it's actually going to be a cruise. The plan, yeah, it's going to be a cruise. We're going to
Fish off the boat.
basically we're gonna. The plan is to fly to Anchorage and cruise 7 days down to what is that? Northern California, and there's not British Columbia, but British, whatever that is over there, on the west coast of Canada.
Yeah.
Is that British Columbia?
BC.
They're going to cruise to British Columbia and then cruise back to Anchorage, and then have 2 days going to Denali and other parks. So there's been a lot of requests. She's been doing a lot of trips, and so she listens to her customers, and this is one of the things that she's been asked to do. And there's been another rec department in Maine that's done something similar. So we're not blazing our own path, but I guess in Lisbon standards we are.
My brother-in-law lives up there, and if I get up there, I might not want to come home.
Well, Sherry goes every year, and her son does a lot of the Iditarod and the other dog races, which inspired her to have dog sledding in Beaver Park this winter. It's kind of cool.
Okay, Matt.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Next item, Twyla.
Is code enforcement with Dennis Douglas?
He was supposed to be here. I'm not sure where he is. So do you want to move on to the Finance Director's school funding overview, and then we can go back to Dennis
Sure.
if he shows up?
Ed, you're up. And I would like to say that I wanted Ed to speak tonight because he understands school financing, and I don't, and there's a lot of us here that don't. Some of us here do, but Ed kind of speaks in my language, so I wanted him to give me an overview of it.
Yep, can do. That's fine.
Thank you. I am Ed Karras, Finance Director. Tonight, Roger's request, to talk a little bit about school funding. I'm going to talk about why we're here as far as the essential programs and services, and the basis for how the state puts together its estimate of what is required to come up with a budget for the school under the essential services and programs scenario. Okay? So I have given each of you a copy of what's called the ED 279, and the ED 279 is basically the document that gets created that identifies what the state will fund and what the town's minimum commitment for education must be. Okay? And that's the document that I plan to work off this evening. Okay? All right. So, school funding. Just a very interesting topic. I have to tell you that there really is no mystery to it. It's a very logically put together type of analysis. Each section, if viewed individually, begins to pyramid up to the total package. Okay? So that's the good part about it. Okay? School funding, the essential programs and services, results from several years of work that began in the mid-90s. We began to realize in about 1991 that we had no control. I say we. At that time, I was working for the state of Maine. And I will say that the state of Maine felt that it did not have adequate control over the costs that were escalating for school funding. And so over the years from, I would say, 95, 96, up to 2003, when the transition was supposed to be made to the essential programs and services funding model, a number of people made contributions, obviously. Okay? So how did it arrive? Again, going back to 1991, the state was in really dire straits. Okay? And we were in the process of downsizing. In my department alone, I can remember we laid off 151 people out of one department, being our buildings and grounds and maintenance. Several other units. We had a crew of about 140 or 50 in the buildings and grounds, and then just in that program, we went down to 101, as I remember. So the legislature really understood that state government operations and its ability to provide services for law enforcement, corrections, health and human services, obviously. As you know, health and human services costs run counter-cyclical to the economy. When the economy is down, expenses are high because, you know, people are out of work, they need assistance. It causes a lot of drag on the Medicaid system. Okay? So coming out of that, and I would say 94, we began to see some reorganization of state government itself to try to streamline. And as we progressed forward between the ending of the McKernan administration and the coming in of the King administration, the legislature pretty much said, guys, get your act together. Somehow here we have to be in charge of what, in fact, we are sending out to the towns and cities. We can't be at the mercy of escalating costs and constantly be in a reactive situation. So in 97, the state board was tasked on coming up with a new funding model to accommodate the learning results that came in, I think, with the Bush administration at the time. In 1999, the Essential Programs and Services Task Force issued a report. In 2000, The legislature came back after it had a chance to review the report and said, guys, you've got to make some tweaking. So they did. We're pretty much now closing out the end of Governor King's administration, and things are still being worked on up to about 2002. Governor Baldacci arrives, and the first thing on his plate is school funding and property tax relief. And so we ended up with what was called LD1, which is the Omnibus Property Tax Relief Bill, which was put in place to, number one, try to control property tax, and number two, as part of property tax control, kick off the funding model for essential programs and services, okay? And with the essential programs and services, basically you ended up with a model that began to identify what is the purpose of the school, what should the schools be doing, what should schools be targeting, okay? And what should the state participate in as far as cost. And they came up with 5 areas, okay, that would be dealt with under essential programs and services. One was funding teachers, aides, technicians, library staff, administrative staff, substitutes, support staff like janitors and maintenance workers, how we were going to fund supplies and equipment for schools, resources, I would say, for specialized populations. Not only does that involve your typical special ed person, okay, it also involved disadvantaged students. And the disadvantaged students were identified as those students that were eligible for free and reduced lunch. Okay, that was the cut that we made there. And also identified those students who had English language deficiencies. Okay? Now that population became what was called a weighted population. In other words, they were funded at a different level than the typical everyday run-of-the-mill student. Okay? So if the everyday run-of-the-mill student was a baseline equivalency of 1, then somebody in the disadvantaged population or the specialized population had a different weighting. And that weighting might be like 1.2, 1.3, right? So as we began to look at how we're going to fund special ed in those programs, that we made sure that we complied with all of the laws regarding access to free and appropriate education, as my wife would say, okay? I've heard that for 35 years, okay? So yes, we weighted toward those populations, okay? Also, as we weighted to those populations, we took into consideration what percentage of the overall school population fell into those categories, okay? And so I think here in Lisbon it's like 51%, I believe, okay? All right, so now it's time to roll this cookie forward. So in the 2003, 2004 timeframe, 2002, biennial budgets are put together. LD1 is enacted as Chapter 2, and the kickoff year is slated for, I think it was the 2004-2005 year, okay? Now, baselines were established, okay? And the baseline was really, where are we today, okay? And how do we move forward? And you have to understand that the EPS is kind of an iterative model in the sense that we started with a baseline. And then as we have moved forward since 2003, obviously things change because nothing in the world is stagnant, okay? So in the beginning, when we felt that we would like to see state funding for education ramped up from the mid-40s up to that 55% level, we tried to set targets out into the future, okay? At the same time, nothing stays the same and everything keeps moving, and guess what? Education was not the only consideration that had to be made at the state level, because We have approximately, when I left state government, I think there were probably 235,000 people out of 1.2, 1.3 million that were eligible for some sort of federal or state aid, okay? And then we had to make sure that we were going to fund enough to take care of children under the Maine Cub Care, okay? We needed to build a new facility, let's say, for mental health in Augusta. We built Riverview, whatever they call it. Prisons needed to get, built. So the pressures are on every single day, not unlike what you folks see here. And here, I have to say it's much more upfront and personal, right? Because you're right here. There's really no separation between you and the citizens here in Lisbon, and everybody has needs, okay? Not only is it the school, but it's the person that walks in the door that needs to get their license taken care of, right? Or they need to pay their property tax, or somebody's calling up that some piece of road is falling apart and needs to be paved. So what I'm saying is only so much money that can go, that, can be generated. And the economy has its ups and downs, and revenues have their ups and downs, okay? But over the years, I think the state has made an honest effort to keep moving ahead, okay? So that's kind of the background as to how we end up here, all right? Before the EPS model, when things were uncontrollable, we had two other models that we experimented with over the years. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, we tried the uniform property tax, right, where we tried to level the rates for property taxes throughout the state of Maine, and by referendum, that went out the window. And then it became an expenditure-driven model, okay, where we try to keep up with how much was being spent, okay? So who benefited? It was all of the larger cities and towns where the population was, because that's where the expense was. And I can remember being working on a budget, and we'd be there at night or whatever, and you couldn't close the budget until the latest GPA run came out and the legislators could see what was their town or city going to receive, okay, and was that acceptable, okay? So now we've got the EPS, which is more of a scientific type of endeavor, all right? So how is it put together is the key, all right? So if we take a look at the first page that I've given you, okay? And we start down through section 1A. Everything drives off school enrollment, okay? That is the first consideration, all right? We're in section A. What is our head count? Our head count is established by taking an attendance twice a year, which then is fed into what they call the MEDM system up in Augusta. That's up in the Department of Education, where the model is run and maintained. So if you take a look at where we are here, we have some pre-K population, okay? We have K through 5, we've got 6 through 8, we've got obviously 9 through 12. And we take attendance, as you can see, twice a year, and we come up with our average count, okay? Now, so how do we relate this to what goes on as far as funding, okay? Now we begin to apply a matrix. We're under the learning results in the model that was created, okay? And I'm not going to defend the matrix one way or the other because I'm not an educator. So I can't tell you whether the ratios are adequate, inadequate, generous, or whatever. But let's take a look at the first line, teachers. And we're not going to go through every single line, okay? But let's take a look, okay? So number 1, teachers, okay? Pre-K, we have a ratio, or I should say pre-K through 5, of 17 to 1. The model for the EPS and learning results says that for every 17 kids in this area, you ought to have 1 teacher, okay? And so how do we arrive at that? Okay, and how do we arrive at the EPS FTE on that to come out with the 38.6? Well, we look at the head count, and we identify the average of the two attendance periods, and we see that our pre-K to 5 population, okay, is 657, okay? Now this, obviously, if we're working in 16-17, this is the prior year count that it's based on, okay? So we take that 17-to-1 ratio, and we divide 17 into the 657, and the EPS model tells us that our FTE equivalency for the 657 should be about 38 to 39 teachers, okay? And we do the same thing all the way across, all right? We do the same thing with the 6 to 8, the 9 to 12, okay? And we come up with our EPS total of 78, okay? And then we weight that against what we are actually committing for resources here in Lisbon, okay? In this case, we have reported to the state that we have committed 75.7 FTEs, okay? So what does this mean? This means that we're a little bit under, okay? But in some cases, it kind of acts as a little bit of a cushion, okay? Because we're going to be reimbursed at 103%, because if you look at the 78, and you divide 75.7 into 78, we come up to 1.03, okay? And so now we take the 1.03, and guess what? There's another piece here, and that's what's called a salary matrix. And I think I've given each of you in your packets a salary matrix, okay? I hope. And as typical for myself, I didn't save
It's
one.
the 7th page in.
Yeah, I didn't save one for myself, I don't think, but that's okay. Okay, so what does the salary matrix do? If you look at it, I'm thinking, recalling it from memory now, it's going to have, thank you, Clyde. It's going to have several categories, okay? So we're going to look at how we're going to weigh the experience that teachers have and what that should be translating into for salary, okay? So what happens is we go through the weighting process based on our staffing profile here in Lisbon, okay? And then from the staffing profile, we also identify the closest cost here for the level of education. So if we look at it, a new teacher with no experience being hired with a BA comes in at an average cost for the matrix of $34,174, okay? So there's your reimbursement rate for a teacher with no experience and only a BA, okay? Now, why is it that some teachers have a hard time getting hired? Obviously, the longer you're in, you can see the higher the salary goes. And as you move out to the right, when you get up to the doctorate level, you're a pretty expensive person. But for a town that can retain its staff, okay, the reimbursement rate goes up. So the more senior and the more qualified your staff is through education, okay? I'm not saying that's the only method by which you would judge the worth of a teacher, but obviously the model equates excellence in the classroom to some degree with a level of education and experience. So you work the matrix, and then you come up with how you're going to come up with the cost for teachers, okay? So then we take a look at the calculation, okay? So it's the actual number of FTEs that we have times the salary on the matrix, all right? And we come up with what our baseline is, and here the baseline for teachers is 3.68 million. And now we get the kick, all right? Now we kick in that 3%, so our adjusted EPS salaries go up to almost 3.8, okay? And then we take the total salaries, and now we're going to break them down between elementary school and 9 through 12. And we do that based on, again, going back to the attending counts. We can see at the bottom of those averages, you've got pre-K to 8 represents 73% of teacher cost, and on the 9 through 12, it's about 27. So that's how the salary gets weighted, okay? Now, you kind of get rewarded, or I won't say penalized, but if you're over what the model says, okay? So let's take a look at just going down. If you look at health, okay, the model says that really on an 800 to 1, a 1 to 800, you need one health educator to 800 kids, okay? And so the model says you should have 1.5, okay? Lisbon has decided to put more emphasis, for whatever reason, into health, okay? Can't say it's good or bad, but obviously somebody's identified that that's probably a need. However, because we exceed the recommended ratio, we're only being reimbursed at a 50% rate, because in here, we're twice what the EPS calls for, okay? All right. Now, if we move up a notch, okay, and we look at librarians, okay, the EPS model says that we should have one librarian to about 800, okay, and 1.5. And here we only have one. So if we look at the funding module, we actually enjoy a little bit of an increase because we are under. And so as you look at each of those, you can identify the overs and unders and where we're getting reimbursement of at least 1 to 1 or better and under the 1, okay? So if you go down to school administration, you can see that we ought to have, on average, approximately 1 to 315, let's say, and so you're being reimbursed, you should have 4.2, we're at 4.5. So the town is only being reimbursed at a 93% rate, okay? So now we have pretty much established here what our cost of teaching is, okay? And so now if we were to take and look at line C, or section C, we have to now layer on benefits to each of these teachers and other positions. And so the way it's done is we're going to take a look at the educators first. And so if you look at, let's concentrate on the elementary. We have salaries of 2.765, guidance at 139.5, librarians, and health educators. Stop. That's it. If we were to sum those 4 positions up, or types of positions, and we look down at section C, number 1, you would see that elementary salaries are at $3,004,007, and you can see the similar calculation for secondary, okay? The reimbursement rate under the formula is 19% for the computation of benefits. So on those salaries, the model calls for 19%. And so if we were to take the calculation of, 3,004,007, and now I'm going to throw you a little curve, because now we've got to add in substitute teachers to this. So we drop down a little and we pick up our subs, okay, which amount to, in section D, $37,782 based on the formula for elementary support, okay? That equals about $3,612,550, okay? And so then what we're going to do is we're now going to fold in what's called a regional adjustment, okay? Because we're only going to be reimbursed at 98% of our cost. Why? Because it does not cost as much to live in this area as it does in York County, okay? All right, so York County gets a bonus, or York schools, York, not York County, but the York City, town of York. They get 106%, but their total cost of education is about $19 million. And York funds over $18 million, and the state's only kicking in $1 million, okay? So there are pros and cons as to where you are on that scale. So every school district pretty much has a scale, okay, and a reimbursement rate. And let's see, I know I brought one. I'll show you what it looks like when we finish up. Then we take the calculation, we layer on the benefits, and we come up with our cost of elementary teachers, okay? The next piece of this is that we go down and we have our library educators and library technicians, okay? And that would be items 5 and 6. And then we have our clericals, and we weight that with number 7 on section B, and finally our administrators. And you can see that each one of those classes of employee has a different weighting for percentage of benefits, okay? Now, the next piece of this is that we begin to layer on non-personal services costs, all right? And the reimbursement rate for this upcoming school year, okay, is we look at reimbursement rate for half a day. For substitutes, going to be 41. Supplies and equipment are going to be $367. Okay, now, this is per student, okay? And as you go down that entire list, it's 63, 27, 38, 233, and for operations and maintenance, 1,073. And we do the same thing as we look at the cost of 9 through 12. And obviously, as we look at the older group, it costs more to support those folks in the classroom and more to support their activities. So we have a different scale of reimbursement, okay? Supplies and equipment go up to 506. Extracurriculars go up from 38 to 121. And we look at operations and maintenance. It costs more to maintain those folks, so we go up from 1,073 to 1,275 because obviously the little guys aren't into ball fields and soccer fields and that sort of thing, which also add to the cost. Now, each one of those cost units is multiplied times the student count. And when you extend that out, you come up to the amount of money that you see there. All right? Now we're going to pick up each one of these sections. Okay? And as we pick up these sections, we're going to pick up our cost of teaching. Okay? We're going to pick up our cost of benefits. We're going to pick up the items in section D, and we're going to pick up other adjustments, okay? And in this case, we can see that the staffing, the regional adjustment is applied, and it is a minus, okay? Because again, we're kicking in that 2%. And you can see that Title I is being deducted as well, okay? So what happens with Title I? A reduction, you say. My God, what are we going to do? Well, yes, it's a reduction, but you know what happens? It comes out of this budget and gets returned through Title I grant. So there's really, is there a loss? Yeah, it's a matter of what pocket you're going to take it out of. But it really does not belong in the funding formula because we're not raising it out of general funds, okay? It comes into the school with approximately another $750,000 to $1 million in Fed funds to do things like Title I, nutrition, and a bunch of other things, okay? So we bring up all of these cost components minus the adjustments, and we then take a look at our student count. We have 921.5 in the elementary side, 343 on the other side, and we come up with a cost per student, okay? And the cost per student becomes $6,277 and $66.95, okay? And those numbers become important because they will transition over and drive what happens on the next page, okay? And without going through all the calculations, we'll just kind of scoot down the page, okay? You aren't penalized severely in any one year for the loss of population, okay? And if you look at one of the charts that I gave you back in your package, all right, let's go back, and you can see that at the end of the last page, it's a grid that looks like this. And if you look at where Lisbon has been, okay, at the time, oh, I have an error right away. Go to the bottom of the left-hand column, and you see 2004, make that a 5, an 05. But you can see the trending in the population, okay? We start out with 1,428 at the inception of the essential services, the EPS model, essential programs and services, okay? And every year there's fluctuation in the head count, sometimes up, sometimes down. But in fact, if you were to put this on a graph and you did some exponential smoothing or even some linear, and you overlaid it on that graph, what do you think you're going to find? You'll find a graph that kind of goes in a kind of wavy line, but the trend looks like this, okay? So you say, well, you know, I've got to look at what I've got coming up through the lower grades that are going to go into the higher grades, and maybe the graph isn't really right. But if you were to break down pre-K through 8 and 9 to 12, the trend is consistent because something is happening as people get from the K to 5, the 6 to 8 range, and when they get into that 6 to 8 range, you begin to see some drop-off. And when they make the jump to high school, it even becomes more significant, okay? All right, so let's look at our historical allocations. And each one of these is at, I'm going to call gross, because there are adjustments to the allocation that must be made, and I couldn't find anything beyond the year that I came in as far as good information on the various adjustments that get made to the state funding. So I've gone in at what the model shows, and actually I've updated this to reflect the passage of the law that came into effect last week. If I look at Lisbon's historical funding model as a percentage of the overall allocation of what's appropriated for state aid, we run it somewhere around 0.008. So I took the 0.008 and multiplied it times our typical subsidy. And I thought we'd come in, I was telling Diane, and she can verify this, I said somewhere around 131,000, okay? I was off, all right? We came in, I think we're around 139 to 140 is what it came in at. We get 68 on the spend side, and I think it's 75 on what we can reduce our town commitment. The town commitment was slated at $4,454,000. As of this week, we're down to like $4,380,000 and change, okay? All right, I hear a lot about the 55%, and we'll leave that for down the road. So let's go back to where we left off on page 2. You're not penalized at that last count when you begin to estimate, okay? Because we take into consideration 6 attendance sessions, okay? So it's a 3-year smoothed average, okay? We do a little bit of math, and we come up with what the average count is. Well, the first thing I would do, what they do, is they take the last 2 years. So if you look at April and October of 15, and we take our counts, we add them together, and we divide by 2, and we come up with a number, and then we begin to look at how did we do, okay? If we jump down to K to 8, our last year average exceeds what the prior years were in those 3 years. So we don't get any kind of a declining enrollment penalty at that point, okay? If we look at the line above and we look at our pre-K, our 4-year-old pre-K to K, we can see that here we have a declining enrollment, so we end up with, I won't call it a penalty, but we end up with less money because of the declining enrollment. And if we look at the high school, the 9 through 12, we end up with declining enrollment. And where we get hurt is that the average decline throughout the state of Maine is 1%. In Lisbon, we jumped to over 1%, and we're up over a little, over, I think it's 2%. So we get whacked pretty hard on declining enrollment, even though we try to smooth it by looking at the 4 preceding counts, okay? So we take each of these counts, okay? We only do it for the pre-K on an October count, and we begin to come up with what the basic cost allocation is. And when I say the basic cost allocation, this is the everyday kid who you pack off with a lunch, and I won't say is self-sufficient in school, but is not part of that special group, okay? If we go down to the weighted counts, all right, we can see that now we're going to get an extra kick here, okay? And the extra kick becomes the fact that if you look at the forecast, Lisbon has over half its population either in disadvantaged or on the pre-K through K, and then from K to 8 and 9 to 12. So those are the folks that, you know, we had talked about on the free and reduced lunch, okay? We only had 1 pupil, okay, who qualified for limited English proficiency, okay? And we can see the weighting for those. And so we use the weighting, we multiply it times the factor, and we end up with a weighted cost allocation for those folks. And then we go down to the targeted funds, okay? We have student assessment funds, okay? Can't tell you that I know what that is, but obviously it must have to do with testing and evaluation of some sort, okay? We have technology resources all the way through. And, you know, I have to tell you, one of my greatest accomplishments as controller actually when I was Director of Finance, was helping the governor negotiate the Apple contract the first time around, and it was a really great thing for I think, for kids. And we come up with how we're going to pay for that, okay? And so now what we do is we come down to the next significant line, okay? We look at whether we are a small school or an isolated school. In a small school, I think it's one where there are fewer than 15 kids per grade level, I think. And the school has to be isolated, which means I think it's like 8 to 10 miles away from the nearest school, other school, okay? We don't qualify, okay? So there's no adjustment there. Now, we come down, add all this stuff up, and we're in at operating allocations of $9,383,000, okay? But now we have this thing called transition. And this is the $281,000 that shows up on 281,506 that shows up on the subsidy comparison report that you got from Mr. Green. All right? So what does this do? Okay? This has a little bit to do with the fact that overall we have not reached 55% of funding of education, and I don't think we ever will because it's a chase your tail. Okay? How much did the education cost go up statewide this year? Does anybody know what the increase is projected to be? Okay? We cut funding out because the governor had other priorities and some of the legislature. But I think the increase statewide was projected to be over $12 million. Okay? So it's a matter of, can you ever catch up? Okay? And how are you going to deal with a town like York that has a $19 million budget, but now only receives $1 million or so? I mean, there are some huge disparities out there. But the disparities are based on income, haves, and kind of the have middle class type of thing. Okay? So that's going to be a tough nut to crack. So we have this transition adjustment which tries to level the playing field to some degree between those who might be at 55% or better and those who aren't. And the transition adjustment is set by the legislature, and so they say 3%. Okay? Lisbon traditionally is funded between 65% and some years 70%. Okay? So the transition adjustment is really saying to the town of Lisbon, what are you complaining about? This money really doesn't belong to you. You are being funded at 55% and better. Okay? So that's a level the playing field type of thing. All right? Once we come up with what the level of playing, what the field is going to be, we get down to this $9.1 million number. All right? And then we look at some of the other subsidizable costs. Gifted and talented programs, you've got technical education and career education, special ed gets in there, and transportation. Okay? Now, as I remember, gifted and talented is based on a baseline of 2 years back, I believe, plus an inflation factor. So it's actual expense plus an inflation factor. I think the same thing for career and technical. And special ed has its own formula. Okay? Transportation, here the transportation that you see is basically an amount for buses that were approved for purchase in prior years. Okay, so that's the state's participation. So we take the 9.1, we take the 2.8, we take, we're going to have some subsidy for teacher retirement. So we fold in teacher retirement of $240,982, and we now come up with an operating cost Okay, this is what it is to educate the kids, okay, of $12,204,000. And then Lisbon is fortunate enough to have participation on 2 schools, and we have debt service that the state participates in, okay? Now, debt service is what? It's a built-in decline year over year, okay? So last year it was $855,000, is what the state participated. This year it's $829,000. The next year you're going to lose another $30,000. And as debt service declines, so does the state's participation, okay? So you really can't mix apples and oranges here. You really have to remove the debt service from the equation because there's no impact on the everyday student, okay? I bet your son doesn't really care if debt service goes up or down, okay? As long as he's got a building to go to, all right? That's the impact. Obviously, you don't want kids in unsafe facilities or aged facilities. But when we talk about operating cost, it's not an operating cost. But in the end, we come up to this budget to educate kids of $13 million, okay? And from here, what happens is, I guess I would say, LD1 begins to kind of kick in here to some degree, all right, with the formula, because it was an integrated bill, okay? So if we go to page 5, okay, we're dealing with a $13 million budget, okay, and 1,264.5 kids, okay? Although I discovered a math error here, it's 1,265, so you got a kick of 1 kid, okay? And now what we do is take a look at breaking down this $13 million, and we can see that it is the operating cost and the debt service. And from there, we pick up the valuation here in Lisbon. And the valuation is cyclical, and it goes over a 3-year cycle, so that if there's a spike up or down in 1 year, it's not so wrenching, because we get to look at it over a moving average. So last year, it was 12, 13, 14, okay? This year, it's 13, 14, 15, okay? And our average valuation came up to $527,000. Each year, the Department of Education sets a statewide mill rate, okay, to make sure that the appropriate amount of funding is raised on the local level. Last year, the mill rate amounted to 8.23, okay, which meant that the town's rate was a little bit less. And if you remember, last year, I think we only had to raise $4,200,000 and some odd thousand. Was it 4,210, something like that? So this year we get plugged in at $4,454,000 because we take our mill rate times the average property tax cost over 3 years, okay? And so the town's commitment that it must raise to meet the minimum is $4,454,000. And if you read the paper here a while back, the state is now in kind of a flap with the city of Augusta because supposedly Augusta did not raise the minimum that it needed to receive the full boat, as we would say, all right? And so now we go back down to the bottom of the page and we can see again what the effect is. We take the 13 million, we minus out what our commitment is, and the state comes up this year with an allocation for us of $8,579,686. And prior to adjustment means just that, okay? Because a couple other things factor in here. What most immediately factored in this last week was the enactment of the tax relief bill, which carried an extra 15 million, of which we benefited by about 139,000, okay? So we got that. So there's the first adjustment. Adjustments mean that between now and the time the legislature gets out of town, this could go up, it could go down. As you might have seen in the paper today or yesterday, the governor is already talking about reducing aid to education again, okay? The other thing that will factor in here is going to be Medicaid, okay? When we arrived at the end of the year before last and in last year, if you were to look at the ED 279 for comparison, you would see these adjustments, and you would also see an adjustment for Medicaid seed, which looked like, again, we lost ground with our participation by the state. But in fact, what happened was that was another thing that the state said, look, we're taking this out. We know that you have these Medicaid students, okay? When I was controller, we used to call it school-based rehab. I don't know what the program is now. But they removed it and said, don't worry about it because we're going to make the payment directly. So no harm, no foul. Another federal program that needed to be removed from what appears to be revenue. So as you do your comparison year over year, you really have to get into what are you comparing? Are you comparing the right numbers? Okay? And so if you look at finally the last page here, okay? Right? The last page is how the funding is going to come in. Okay? And so this is what I see every single month, typically at the end of the month, right, for state aid. All right? So I expect that if nothing changes, or nothing were to change from what I have here, I would be looking every month for $645,819.53. Okay? Now, I don't know how they're going to allocate the extra money, whether they're going to go and flow it through the formula or do it the same way they did last year, and that is it'll be front-loaded and then the payments taper off through the year, okay? And again, I'm kind of waiting to see if there will be another Medicaid adjustment or whether they factored that out. So that's how this is put together, okay? So I think what I'd like to do on another night is to show you how it gets from the ED 279 over to the school department's subsidy comparison report and show you how it should be laid out so that it mirrors what you have here, okay? And that we separate out from the formula the debt service so you can break it down and concentrate on what is our debt load and what is the state paying and what does it truly cost on the operating side, all right? And then be able to really make a better comparison for yourselves, okay? Where you don't allocate the money to any of the lines, you do decide on what the level of the budget is going to be, okay? I've given you a couple other resources. I have to say that the Department of Education probably in all of state government has the most informative website. And you can go in and pick off any report that you want to see regarding how all towns and cities perform as far as finances, percentage of participation, cost per student, globally cost per student, almost by grade, pre-K to K, K to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12. You can see how much it costs for transportation per kid, how much to feed them per kid, you know. there is a wealth of information. You can look at budget reports, okay, that are out there that actually roll things up, so you can say this is how much it cost Lisbon for instruction, this is how much it cost for instruction here for librarians, and get a higher level look. The other handy thing that is out there that I typically use at the end of the year is we have to report in undesignated fund balance. And so the Title 20A, has requirements on what will be done with undesignated fund balance, and they require a report that shows what the undesignated fund balance is and how it's applied, what's left over, what can be carried over, and what there may be available for the following year. As you look down, this is just one small cut of what I found out there. There are a lot of good reports out there for you or any citizen here in Lisbon to really understand how the budget's put together and what it entails. So that is pretty much how we get to where we are. The next piece, I guess, is looking at the next part of the puzzle as far as how the school's budget is put together and brought forward to you. But this now gives you the baseline and demystifies, because there is more than one person in Augusta who can run this model, okay? It really demystifies how the state comes up with its funding formula. And it's far better than it ever has been before. Not that it's great, it can use more tweaks, but it is more equitable amongst all towns and cities than it has been before. Are there any questions that you guys might have?
Yes,
Me.
I got a couple.
Okay.
You said we get more than 55%?
Yep, you average 67%.
But we were never told that. We've been always told that we only didn't even get 55.
You get 67%. Okay.
I'd like to know.
Yeah, I'd like to know where that, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that breakdown. I mean, we can say that we get 67%. I know you got some numbers here.
That doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah, that doesn't show me how we get 67%.
No
Well,
educational system in this state gets 55%. I can guarantee you that.
that's not true.
That is absolutely
No,
true.
it's not
Debating
true.
it is not what we're saying. We're saying, show us.
It's
Show
not
us.
true.
Show us. That's it. I'm happy to
You're-
see it.
Okay, so if you look at your total allocation, 13,027,000, right?
Sure.
Okay, what's the ratio between the local contribution and the state contribution?
What I guess I'm saying is this number, if you're using the mill rate of 8.44 to get your number, then this is all voodoo numbers, because the latest bill that passed has our mill rate at 8.30.
How
So-
old?
Right, it got,
So-
it was revised because there was more put into the formula.
15, so
Right.
you have 15
But you're
million
still gonna end up
of that.
with more money from the state and less of a commitment for the town, right?
Sure.
So it's going to drive up your funding. And I've got that right here. Your original contribution was $4,454,000.
Which page?
Looking at the chart, okay? Now, the ED 279 has not been revised yet,
Right.
okay? So you can see that the mill rate that was set, based on the amount of money that was available to be spread out over everybody,
Sure.
okay, was 8.44, okay?
Yep.
All right, at 8.44, what does the percentage break down to? Okay?
You know, your calculators.
No,
You don't even need a calculator. I mean, you go to, I think it is page whatever, hold it, I'll find it. I'll find it. Okay, go to page,
Section 5.
section 5, bottom. Okay? Local share of education, 34.17%. State share of education, 6.53%. 65.83%. The math is not hard to follow here.
So that's based on, like we said, the using formulation of the 8.44 mill rate, right?
Yep.
Yep, okay, great.
Okay? Now, the mill rate gets revised to 8.3. We get about, what did I say, about 139,000 more.
Yep.
Some to offset tax, some to spend. Okay?
Yep.
Our tax goes down, our mill rate goes down, funding goes up. What do you think happens to the ratio?
That being said, let me ask you about, how many school budgets have you prepared?
How many school budgets have I prepared?
Yeah.
I don't prepare school budgets.
Okay, I'm just trying to
Okay.
understand. So this is the first time that you've done this exercise, would that be
No,
fair to say?
I've been doing this exercise since the 1990s,
But with this particular formula, I guess, is what I'm trying
since
to...
1992.
With the EPA,
No,
didn't you say this
1994.
formula wasn't enacted
The
until the early
formula
2000?
began to be developed in the mid-90s.
The King, if I listen to your
It was under the King
administration,
administration.
and it was enacted roughly around the 04-05 budget season?
The implementation was slated for the 04-05. The funding was put in place in the 2002-2003 biennium.
And so this particular model that we're using tonight, you've been doing it, is this your first time ever tackling it?
No,
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to understand.
okay?
Good.
So I have given you the historical amounts of money that Lisbon has gotten. As I said, I have not adjusted it in any way. I've picked it off Education's website, okay? And all the way down through, Lisbon has been a high receiver.
How's your math doing down there?
We're good. We are good.
And I got another question while they're working on that. Does the school department get federal grants?
Yes, yes. They do. As a matter of fact, we accounted for I remember the number was at least $750,000 in expenditure.
Yeah, you referenced
year.
that. You referenced it somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million annually. I made the note.
Expenditure, receipts, the outflow was $750,000.
So you could get that information just from the audit, because that would trigger an A133
Yeah,
audit, right?
so basically, you ended up with actually more. You ended up with, on the school nutrition, you got $512,000, and other federal programs kicked in $763,000, and you expended out $371 on school nutrition, and overspent your grants, and spent out, you overspent, so you actually spent out on the other Fed programs $785,000.
Okay, and I'm gonna ask you one more question. I had 5 here, but I'm gonna, it's been a rumor, and I've heard it. And it's number 1 on my question list. I've heard that the school committee members, superintendent, school department employees, or others consider repeatedly that these meetings and other meetings that the council is singularly responsible for the decrease in school fundings provided to the Lisbon by the state. Is that true or false?
False. You met your minimum commitment, okay? You're not penalized. There was less money allocated this year for school funding to begin with, okay? It was $20 million less than the previous year. So everybody knew that there would be an impact, all right? But no one could judge what the impact would be on their school districts at the time because the numbers were not yet turned in by everybody in the school districts. So it was really not possible to know how each municipality would fare. Additionally, as we've said, the mill rate went up from 8.23 to 8.44 based on the availability of funding, okay? And that coupled with our smoothed average, okay, going out in time, you would hope that your property values would go up, because if they're going the other way, I got a bigger problem. You'll get more school money, but you haven't got much of a town going for you, okay? So that impacted you. Plus the fact that you have declining enrollment, and your declining enrollment, as I said, exceeded what the average was. So, you know, you get hurt. And so if you take the number of students that you've lost times the $6,000 or $7,000, plus all of the ancillary costs, I mean, that's an impact. And obviously, your debt service went down, so there's a built-in loss. You're not the only ones. Portland lost $2.7 million in the initial round, okay, because of their loss of student population and the fact that they're doing a little bit better than average, from what I read in the paper, on some of the specialized student areas. Okay, so you lose a little there. You have to understand that this is really a battle because we've lost what? About 25,000 students over the last 10 years or so. And although they see it bottoming out, you know, I was talking to one of my former pals, and the trend might continue downward for the next 5 years or so. And obviously, as the forecast economically is for Lisbon to keep losing population through the analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that obviously will continue to impact the school. So those are the things that really conspired, I think, to impact your funding.
Any questions?
Good.
Alan?
I got nothing, sir.
Okay. Nobody else, all right. Oh, thank you, Ed.
We're good?
Yeah,
We're good.
Good. What's next? Next item, Carla.
Thank you, Ed.
Is the fiscal year 17 municipal budget presentation?
I promise I won't be so long. So I'm just going to highlight what you have in front of you, your budget booklet. And if you could just go to the management letter talking about this budget, I just want to say that tonight's budget is for the fiscal year 17 municipal and wastewater. It does not include any revenues at this point because it's a little early to project the revenues. And I have to say that this is the very first rough draft, and it is a moving target, and we will be making changes as we go through the budget process. I also have listed in this letter on the second page some of the significant changes in this budget compared to last year's budget. The actual increase right now, as proposed, is $674,639, or an 8.9% increase over the current fiscal year. And that is, that's the actual total budget. That includes the county tax. The county tax had a small increase of about $2,734. The wages and benefits for this budget total $4,407,446, comprising of about 54% of the budget. I have factored in, going through this, excluding the 2 unions that we have to do union negotiations on, I have included a 2% cost of living. And I have also factored in a 9% cost estimate for the increase in health insurance for the second half of the year, which will begin on January 1st. And also, we are going through the process of town insurance bids, and I factored in at this point a 5% increase, but that could change once we get the bids in. But some of the significant non-salary and wage increases, as you know, is in technology. That's about a $58,000 increase in this budget. We have some things going on with the buildings that we need to do in the upcoming year, so we have about a $45,000 increase in that department. We, as you know, the council decided to restore that police officer's position that was cut last year, and that's a $63,545 addition to the budget. We have, under equipment and public works, a $15,000 increase. Heavy machinery, $60,000. We've added an additional $175,000 in paving. And our main DOT match of $217,500, and that's going to be for our engineering and right-of-way on those 4 MDOT projects coming up. And we are going to have to pay that in the upcoming budget. So that's a fixed cost that I can't change. And because of the reval, we're not sure what we're going to get in for abatements, if any. So I talked to Kathy, and we decided to increase that by $15,000. So those are really the driving forces of the $674,000 increase. Some of the unknowns that I have not built into the budget right now, as you recall, we did do a fixed rate on the standard offered for electricity. I'm just waiting for our first bill to come in so I can project the decrease. That decrease is not reflected in this budget. Once I get that in, then I will do that. So that's it pretty much for the highlights of this budget. On the inside of your sleeve, you'll have the actual budget worksheet that shows the current budget, our initial budget, and the manager's budget. The initial and manager is the same this year, so this goes line by line. There are no changes between the initial budget, which is what the department heads presented, and what I'm presenting to you tonight. If you go to the back of the book, the back sleeve, you're going to see another report. It's called a custom budget report, and it's going to show you 2016 budget, the current year budget, what we've expended year to date, and what the balance is. And it's also going to show you 2017 proposed budget, so you'll be able to see the increase and decrease by line items. And that's all I have for you tonight. As we go through our budget reports, budget workshops, we'll be going through this whole binder department by department, and the department heads will be presenting their budgets to you. Any questions on the budget?
Okay, I will like to remind the council that from now on, most Tuesdays will be until sometime in April, will be
Yes.
designed for, if not meetings.
The
will be
budget
workshops.
schedule is in the front here.
Okay, Next item, Carlo.
Is the audience participation and response for new items.
Good evening. Bob Kaler, Dumas Street, Lisbon Falls. I'm not sure if this is the time for it, but it's actually related to the presentation as things were sort of drifting around. So, and again, I think I've said this before, fixing blame certainly doesn't fix anything, as we move forward, and I know the council has expressed a desire to do that relative to the school. One of my questions as I look through this, and thankfully as a building administrator, I don't have to know all the ins and outs of this, so I'm learning as I go through this too. So one of my questions, whether it's for Mr. Karas or for the council, is based on what we as a municipality raise locally for the minimum amount, if the reimbursement rate is correct at 67%, if that figure's correct. And I'm not saying it isn't, I'm just saying I've got other fish on my menu. So if we spend any more, if we raise and expend any more on the minimum amount, are we reimbursed at that same 67%? I guess is my question. So in other words, because you mentioned sort of the local funds that we raise, so.
Right, so you're reimbursed at exactly what it is in the B 279, once it's finalized. Anything that the town spends over and above is a separate item on the warrant. Must go to referendum for approval as well.
Right. And my question is, are we reimbursed for that? Nothing, zero?
Yep, zero.
Interesting, okay.
Anybody else? Okay, next item, 12.
Next item is under appointments, Order 2016-68, the Appeals Board, 1 member, term expiring 2018.
Can we do all of these at one shot?
Sure, would you like me to read them all?
Yes.
You have an applicant lease award for that position. Order 2016-69, Appeals Board 1 member, term expiring 2017, and you have an applicant, Fern La Rochelle, for that. And you have an Order 2016-70, Appeals Board 1 member, term expiring 2016, and the applicant, Chris Rubelis.
I need a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? I think
They're all good people.
all good people is right.
People.
I need a show of hands.
6 in favor, 0 opposed, motion carries.
Next item, 12.
Counselor Communications?
Going back to last meeting, Councilor Chair Bickford asked us to actually sit with the school department, school committee specifically, on update where we stood on the budget. So I'm going to present their handouts. Should be in the packet there, and everybody up here has it, 2 sheets.
It's exactly what I asked for.
Yeah. The first, I'll go through and I'll reference some highlights and an updated subsidiary report that is reflective as of today with the increased funding that was passed last week. First part, 2016-17 local share includes $640,246 in local debt service payments. That is $453,000 for the gym, $58,100 for the track, and the 2 energy efficiency payments. I couldn't tell you what the acronym means. I know what QZAB is, but they're both school funding projects for totaling another $129,000. That $640,000 in debt service is 11.6% of the tax increase that you will see on the subsidiary sheet when we go to that. Next bullet point, there's a 0.4% budgeted spending increase in the budget that's presented as of the school committee's 3/14/2016 meeting. Other local communities that you actually seen in the paper or heard recently, sampling Auburn 4.6%, Lewiston's looking at a 7.8%, Portland's a 4.5%, South Portland 3.7%. Now, mind you, these are not been updated with whatever information that they got back. As Mr. Carras mentioned, I was making a note, they dropped 2.7 million, I think it was, in the original. Looking at the spreadsheet that was published today, I think they're coming in at, I made the note. It looks like they got back $1.4 million. So that's a pretty sizable windfall associated with that. That's covered in one of my other bullet points, so I'll continue on. To get to this point, the school funding budget started with a $1.5 million increase that's been pared down to the 68,000 or whatever the changed number that was there. There are 7 full-time positions that are actually included in that reduction to this point, so there are real losses through the positions that were either budgeted last year or positions that will be vacated this year that will not be replaced. They are a field maintenance position at the high school level in middle school, K through 8 grade level teacher, a K through 12 art teacher, 1 SRO officer, PE health instructor, 1 administrative secretary, and a variety of different restructuring impact for administration with the bus, van, and guidance, maintenance, whatnot. There are 7 full-time positions. The next, what I can gather from the state's sheet today that Mr. Green actually verified is there's a net increase in the state subsidy this $67,771 is what I came up with. The mill rate reduction to 8.3 from 8.44 as originally written is generally a positive for most communities. Some of that is actually tempered with the decrease in the state valuation as well as corrections to the ED 279 submissions that were actually being allowed with the stipulations for the $15 million funding that was approved last week. Net 13% increase in taxes is also partially due to the decreased revenues, including, I'm not pointing finger at any one source, the revenue side actually has an impact into this. There's $241,000 reduction in interest in gym and track interest proceeds. As you well know, through the course of last year, it was one of the contested items associated with that with the use of the funds, but as it settled, the interest on the proceeds was a revenue stream to the school system. Likewise, the proceeds from the energy efficiency as well was an income stream. It's an understanding from what I gathered from Mr. Green that it was actually detrimental to the school department in that fact that it should have actually been carried as a line item and the revenue showed otherwise. It would have favored into the EDS, but that's my understanding, and don't quote Mr. Green on what he's there because he's answered every question that we've asked of him. There's a $478,000 reduction in the state subsidy at present based on the revised subsidy sheet. And parts that Ed mentioned in his, the energy savings, as I mentioned, and the decreased student enrollment trend. The last piece, school subsidy has decreased $90,000 for $750 since the presentation. Point that I'm making on that is that just like a budget that we just heard the first number associated with tonight, it's a leaping off point and a work in process. Some of the highlights that Diane mentioned associated with the budget, they, on the school side, have a 9% factor for insurance as well. They know what they're budgeting for wage increases. They know what they're budgeting for workers' compensation, retirements, a variety of other things. So that figure is a moving target that will obviously soften before they're done. If you go to the second sheet, I don't want to beleaguer the point. You guys have seen the original one. The point that I'm making is that you see the reductions associated with that and key things pointed out through that. You can see where I came up with a 0.4% spending increase, and also the 13% local increase to taxes. Any other questions? I'll be glad to entertain them. I would second what Mr. Collier said, and the fact that it's one thing to walk the talk associated with partnership. We need to actually truly honor it if it's actually going to stick, because I look at this budget very much like January, in the fact that if we didn't have the school committee chair standing right there and Roger sitting right there, there's no way in hell we'd have had an actual deal to actually pass this, to actually work with the voters. You need 7 of us to actually sell it, because we can derive a budget. It's a very different thing to get one passed through a referendum. To you folks.
No, I did exactly what I wanted. I'm impressed. So, basically, I've got my comments. I would like to, if you three would work with Ed a little bit. Sure. And see if you can really get your handle around what we were told, especially about the 60-some%. I would like to have you come back and explain it to me in your terminology. And then we'll go from there. I think that's only fair.
Well, by all means, in that regard, numbers can be presented in a variety of different terms. That's what accountants do in that regard. Associated with it, I look at this as, again, I'll say it repeatedly, it's one basket of goods. The fact is, I do not believe that either side of the equation is fundamentally evil on one part or the other. In that regard, at the end of the day, we need to find a way to actually best portray what we're actually looking for, because combined at this point, is it $1.5 million? Anybody been doing the math out there? That's the reality.
Yeah, that's why we made these committees this year, so you could, when we go to the public hearing, I want everybody unified.
Agreed.
For sure.
Agreed.
Like I said, it might be a hard road to get there, but we're gonna ask some questions.
Well,
I'm not the same as the last chair, and actually, I'm not as smart as the last chair, so I have to ask for help from other people, and I am gonna do that. So I'm asking for your help, so.
No, in that regard, too, one of the things that I'll point out, and I'm going to be done talking because I know I just interrupted Cassie here as well. Everybody had to actually take a break after the January timeframe with a referendum vote associated with that to go back to their neutral corners to be able to come up with the budgets that you're hearing about tonight. In that regard, it's time to actually come back together, because there's going to be dialogue between school committee chair and yourself associated with that, because that's what ultimately made this. It's got to be that faith that actually makes this stand.
You pretty much just reiterated
Okay.
what I was going to say, because I was going to say in order to make this happen, we need to work together and stop with the pointing of fingers and the vendettas.
No, there's no, as far as I'm concerned, there's no vendettas. We want to get the facts out, and
Yeah, and that's,
Get it as close as what we can.
I think it's great. I think it's a great starting point. It's good to hear that. I think anyone would agree. I think for the opportunity, I welcome the opportunity to work with Ed. I think that's going to be a good thing because I think it'll help build some transparency there and hopefully build a bridge between Ed and Mr. Green, because I know that's something that he's expressed in the past. He'd like to partner with Mr. Green, so I'd like to see that. I know we'd all like to see that happen because that would help maybe repair some of the fractures from last year.
well, it has to. Or the fact is our operating audit is not going to improve next year. And the fact is we only got so much time to actually look at some of the issues that were actually addressed in that critical assessment of our control systems. If that's a reality, we need to mend fences across the board and actually do more than lip service on the topic.
This is a good first step.
Yeah.
Okay. Next item, Twyla.
There is no executive session adjournment. Order 2016-71.
Need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
I looked right at you. I need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Order passed, 6-0.
Did everybody sign the warrants?
I have.
Oh, no.
Where are they at?
They're
Are they
right
coming
here.
down?
Yes, sir.
Okay. They're coming down.
Oh, my God, I have a migraine.
I'd have enough signatures, as long as I have 4.
I signed today on some things?
You did, one,
My eye.
Go and sign the other one. It's water, isn't it?
It's on.
but I got all the others.
I didn't see him. Over there.
Oh, they're down.
I'll find him. I'll find him. Sign up.